All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Craig Casper. I am the managing director for NYHD, which is the Institute for Hearing and Balance based in New York City. I'm an audiologist and I specialize in balance and equilibrium disorders. And alongside of me, I have a wonderful team of audiologists in the city who specialize primarily in hearing disorders, hearing technologies, and things like tinnitus, ringing in the ears. And in conversation this month, June is actually Migraine Awareness Month. So we view this as a really good opportunity to explore the crossroads of migraine and what we do in the clinic every single day, specifically helping patients with balance-related disorders and dizziness. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with vestibular migraine, it's a diagnosis that is becoming much more commonplace. In fact, it's the second most common cause of vertigo in adults, and it affects, according to the American Migraine Foundation, about 3% of the population. So it's a pretty significant amount of patients that we see that might have suspected vestibular migraine. And while I can definitely talk about vestibular migraine from a clinical perspective, I felt it would be much more valuable to have a conversation with someone who understands firsthand the impact vestibular migraine can have on our quality of life. So my guest today is Alicia Wolf. She is also known as the Dizzy Cook. She's a creative, she's a blogger, she's the author of the Dizzy Cook cookbook. She's also a new mom, and she's someone who has learned to thrive with chronic vestibular migraine. Now, I found her story to be very inspirational, and I look forward to learning more about her path and how she's helping many others get back to living a more fulfilled life despite a diagnosis of vestibular migraine. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to bring Alicia in here. Hey, Alicia, how are you?
Hi, so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, really my pleasure. We connected not too long ago, and I was really fascinated by your story. And I said, I just want to have a conversation with this individual because you're doing a lot of interesting things and you're putting a lot of good information out into the world. It's really educational in nature. And as a clinician, I realize that I know a certain amount about my profession, but there's a lot of things that I really don't know from a patient perspective because I personally have never experienced vestibular migraine. So I was kind of in a very selfish way trying to fill in the gaps by speaking to someone like you. So I'm really happy that you agreed to come on and have this conversation with me today.
No, but thank you so much. And I always love sharing my patient perspective because I think it helps people feel seen and heard and understood. And I really appreciate when other physicians give us that platform to tell our story as well.
Awesome. No, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. One thing that I think that we should share as a disclaimer before we have the conversation, this conversation is for informational purposes. Really, nothing we talk about here really should be viewed as medical advice. And for anyone out there who might suspect that they have vestibular migraine or something similar, we really encourage you to speak directly to your healthcare team regarding any questions relating to your specific situation. So again, educational purposes today. Please don't take anything as gospel per se, because we want to make sure that you are taken care of appropriately by your doctors. So the most important question I have for you is, what's it like to be a new mom?
Exhausting. It's definitely been a life change for me, especially trying to manage a vestibular disorder along with being a new mom. There's a lot less sleep that happens. And actually, my son has been a decent sleeper all along. So that's pretty nice. But there's just been bumps in the road that have happened. And it's funny because I feel like having this vestibular disorder has kind of prepared me for parenthood almost, just having to go through new challenges and not knowing what to expect and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And so I feel like I'm able to roll with the punches a little bit better, but that definitely doesn't make it easier.
Yeah, there's definitely no guidebook when you have kids. So
No.
let's do this. Let's start kind of at a ground level and work our way up in terms of detail and complexity.
Okay.
I think it's important for us to define what vestibular migraine is. Now, some people who might watch this video, whether live or maybe kind of in the recorded form, might be living with something that they might suspect, or maybe they've never even heard of vestibular migraine before. But in this case, with vestibular migraine, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is experiencing significant headaches. That's the first thing that
Yeah.
everybody thinks about when it comes to migraine. So let's talk about your symptoms, because I really want to bring again that personal element into it. What were you experiencing pre-diagnosis? What were you
Mhm.
experiencing, and when did you first start experiencing those symptoms?
Yeah, so actually mine started with a very light dizziness. It just kind of felt like I had a lot of fuzziness in my head, that I couldn't think clearly. I felt a lot of head pressure sometimes. And so originally my doctors thought I had just had a cold or some kind of virus that made me dizzy. And so they kept giving me steroids, and it would maybe help for a day or two, but then it would just come back and not fully go away. And as I progressed and didn't have treatment, I started to feel things that weren't there. So, one moment that really stands out to me to this day, and is so vivid in my memory, was I was driving a bunch of coworkers to lunch, and I slammed on my brakes in the parking spot because I thought my car was moving forward at very fast speed. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, "Did you guys feel that? Like we were moving forward?" And they were like, "No, we've been in park the whole time." And I looked down, and I was just sitting right in my parking space. And I thought, okay, this is not normal. Like, what is going on with my head?
Mm.
And from there, I started to have vertigo episodes. So, spinning vertigo. Sometimes I felt like I was falling or dropping. A very common issue that I began to have was that I felt like I was walking in a bounce house or walking on marshmallows. Like I couldn't gain my footing. It almost got uncomfortable to walk. Like I didn't trust myself, and it became kind of scary. I lost my ability to drive safely, and there was just a number of things that started to happen. I had awful light sensitivity, sound sensitivity. So we would go out to restaurants, and I just felt like I could hear everyone's conversation around me, and I couldn't focus, and it just left my brain so fuzzy. So there were all these weird things going on, but I actually wasn't having any head pain. So I'm really glad you called that out, because when I first got my diagnosis of vestibular migraine, I was like, no, I don't have headaches. And it's just so funny to me because that's everyone's perception. Like I was that person who thought a migraine was just a headache. And now I realize like it's so much more, and that you can have vestibular migraine without having that head pain. Some people do have it, obviously. I just
Yeah.
wasn't one of those people.
It's interesting because when we are talking to patients in the clinic and we ask them questions, there's a whole series of questions regarding balance related equilibrium disorders, because
Mhm.
no one lines up perfectly with a diagnosis usually, although there are common themes and there's patterns that you see. But when it comes to asking questions about potentially vestibular migraine-esque type stuff, we ask questions about family history of migraine. And then we
Yeah.
start asking questions about things like ocular migraine, right? Because maybe someone has a history of ocular migraine and they didn't think that that was related in any way whatsoever. So migraine can manifest itself in a number of different ways, not just headache. Did you have a family history of migraine?
Yes, and my parents never told me until I was diagnosed. All along, they were even I remember my neurologist asked me, and I was like, "No, I don't think so." And then my mom came to me with the meeting because I had such bad brain fog. I used to bring either my husband or my mom with me so they could pick up on things I was missing. And she was like, "Oh, now that I think of it, like your dad does have ocular migraines occasionally. And, I'd get like a bad headache here and there." And I'm like, "Mom, why didn't you say anything?" So I think that, again, everyone's perception, sometimes they get these little symptoms and they may not be as debilitating as what I have,
Mhm.
definitely. And so they just don't count it as having migraine, but now I realize, oh, I have kind of this family history of at least having a few attacks here and there. And it does make sense.
Very interesting. So one of the things that you brought up was when you initially started having these symptoms driving, and it
Mhm.
was limiting in many respects because you have look, there's a fear element there, there's an anxiety element there that we hear from a lot of patients who have some level of balance related issues. Um, from what I understand, you were working in a field that was kind of very intricate. Kind of, you were a watch designer. Is that correct?
Yes, watch design and development.
Gotcha. So a lot of focus during the course of the day and a lot of kind of probably long, stressful days and nights working. Um, and I actually I recently listened to another interview that you did about your story trying to manage work and also this undiagnosed equilibrium disorder because you were not diagnosed with vestibular migraine at that point. But I think it's an important story because you have these conditions that are quote unquote invisible, which most people don't understand necessarily. I'm not talking about the healthcare world. I'm talking about your coworkers, your bosses, et cetera. And it might not necessarily be taken seriously. Would you mind maybe sharing a little bit about that story? Because I think it's an important one to share because it shows how much vestibular migraine, at least your symptoms, really impacted your life to the point where work wasn't really possible.
Yeah, and it was interesting because this happened so gradually, and most of the time I just didn't tell my coworkers about it. I just kind of kept doing what I was doing, and as it began to get worse, I spoke with my boss about it. My direct boss was pretty understanding, and I just said, "Look, it's getting to the point where I'm not comfortable driving into work, and with my job, there was a lot of computer work."
Mm.
Often we had to get up early to talk with factories in Hong Kong and in China. And so there was a lot of discussion online and watching video calls and that sort of thing, as well as a lot of stressful moments, like you said, when we would have one moment that really stands out to me is Nordstrom anniversary. We always had to develop a special watch for them, and they always changed things at the last minute. And so it seems so silly now, but it was really stressful to me at the time. And with Fossil, they were going through a lot of cutbacks. And so they started really limiting my team and moving people who were helping away, all while I was going through this. And so I started to kind of panic a little bit because I was taking on all of this extra work, but feeling worse inside to where I couldn't handle it. And I really had to finally say something, which was scary because I had been trying to get promoted for the past year. And I knew if I said something about my illness, that it would give them a reason to not promote me and to kind of take away the value of all the work I had been doing even before I got sick. And so I held off for a long time, telling my boss. And then when I finally told her, she was like, okay, well, take some time and try to figure this out with the doctors. But it just took me so long to find a doctor that understood that we eventually had to turn things over to HR because 2 weeks turned into a month, which turned into 2 months. And at that point, she was like, I think, FMLA would be a good option for you. So the instant we turned everything over to HR was when things got awful because HR is so by the book and they want everything spelled out for them. They want your doctor to fill out papers. Well, none of my doctors wanted to fill out papers on what my diagnosis was because they didn't know what my diagnosis was. And then not only that, but I was having neurologists tell me I just have anxiety and depression. And so their HR was seeing that as pretty much all of this was my head, and I was potentially trying to find a way to get out of work.
Right.
That's sort of, I'm sure I'm paraphrasing what
Sure.
they actually thought, but that's just how it came off to me. And so When I finally found my current neurologist now, it was like a breeze because he put in, I had people to really advocate for me and to put a name to what I was feeling and to say, okay, this is a legitimate illness and this is why she needs off work. But up until that point, when I didn't have anyone to advocate for me or to validate what I was feeling, it made things really, really hard. And I was scared of losing my job. I mean, I think I came really close to losing my job. But even after that was validated, I still had this pressure to return to work. And so I think I came back way too early and I was initially on a short-term disability, and I had run out of financing from my time off and came back way too early. And I had already made a little bit of progress with my neurologist treatment, but once I came back to all the stress and everything, all my symptoms started to pick up again.
Sure.
And so we tried to move me back to intermittent FMLA. The problem with that was I had to document every single time that I stepped away from my desk or stopped working. And as someone who's also dealing with vestibular disorder, when you're having a vertigo attack, you're not sitting there documenting your hours. You're, vomiting and trying to find a bathroom, trying to figure out how to get home before you do this in front of all your coworkers.
Yeah.
And it came to the point where I was having so many arguments with HR over my hours and if I didn't log anything and that timing. And it was a nightmare. And another thing that happened was they had, which I now know wasn't a great situation. It wasn't legal, but they are legally not allowed to change anything about your job while you're on FMLA. And they changed my team. They changed my desk area. So they moved me from a more quiet location to right in front of a busy walkway, like the busiest walkway in the whole building, which I mean, it's a massive watch company. So they have other space. And I just could tell looking back, like they were really trying to force me out. But the whole situation was just unfortunate. And I think I finally just realized like I'm working so hard and I'm sacrificing my health, and they're never going to promote me after all this situation. So at some point, I got into an argument with one of my superiors over something silly with one of the watch designs we had. And I just decided like it launched me into a vertigo attack for like 3 days, and I had to be home. And I was like, you know what, this just isn't worth it. I have to let go. So it's a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry, but there's just so many components to it. And I feel like it's a lot of what patients struggle with. And
yeah, that's why I wanted you to fill in that gap, because I think it is an important element. Look, it's real life. We cannot stop. The world doesn't expect us to stop when we're dealing with something necessarily. And especially if it's for a longer duration of time. From what I understand, it was 7 months for you before you actually ultimately ended up with the appropriate diagnosis and started to get on the path to wellness and to kind of get back into that part of your world. But look, you described all of these things that patients will describe, from some of the triggers that you had and kind of the way that you're torn between, you have to earn a living and this is your occupation and you were doing this for so many years, but yet your health really is priority. So these are very real issues that we discuss with our patients almost every day. So no, I appreciate you sharing that, because I wanted to understand that part of it from your perspective too. Ultimately, just to kind of fast forward in your story a little bit, you were kind of, as many patients do, you kind of go around the block, you knock on a lot of doors of different healthcare providers across the board, trying to find an answer to your issue. You were lucky enough to kind of get led into the path of the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. Initially, someone had told you that you had a perilimb fistula, which is another kind of a differential, I guess, when it comes to dizziness. And this a physician at Mayo says, no, you have vestibular migraine. And all of a sudden the world just opens up for you. And it led you to a doctor, a neurologist in your own backyard, who happened to be someone who really is into vestibular migraines, I guess,
Yeah.
right? The reason why I'm kind of just laying that out for those who are listening is most vestibular disorders are a process of elimination. Sometimes you can hit the nail on the head, you know exactly what it is, but a lot of times it's kind of, okay, we check that box, let's check this box next, and you're eliminating all the other things. And it's not uncommon for patients to seek help from multiple providers and multiple professions. That's actually an important part of it. But I want you to highlight the concept of being your own best advocate for care, because most of us accept, you get a diagnosis, you accept it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean it's the correct diagnosis. And I'm not minimizing what my colleagues do at all.
Mhm.
I think that we all do great work, and we all are very well-meaning and have great intentions for patients. But sometimes patients have to kind of uncover things for themselves, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about being your own best advocate.
Yeah, I mean, I I moved on pretty quickly from my PCP, who just kept telling me it was a cold, and went kind of straight to an ENT to talk about this. But they did all the hearing tests and some vestibular testing, not all, but they referred me out to a vestibular therapist for vestibular testing, and they did a bunch of testing, and they initially found a weakness in my inner ear. But they were saying it was vestibular neuritis at the time. And when I didn't get better with their vestibular therapy, and this was over the course of, I was going to vestibular therapy like 4 times, 5 times a week for like 3 months. And I just continued to get worse. And I'm like, why am I getting worse? I should be getting better. So I think that was kind of a red flag for me. And I kept pushing them, and they didn't have any more answers. And they were like, well, you're just beyond, we've never seen a case like you before, which is so hard for me to believe now, like that a vestibular therapist told me that. Um, I actually went back to them after I was officially diagnosed, and I was like, why didn't you bring this up? And they're like, oh, we see people with vestibular migraine overdiagnosed. I was like, okay, yeah, you should have at least mentioned this as a possibility. And that just kind of blew my mind as it is. But I mean, I saw some of the best neurologists in Dallas, quote unquote, and they were just telling me, oh, it's all in your head. You just have vertigo. Like if that was a diagnosis, or you just have dizziness, or you're depressed. And I knew that, yeah, I probably have a little more anxiety, and I was really stressed at my job too. But I imagine that most people in this world have some amount of stress that they're dealing with every day. I mean, other people have children, they have jobs, they have to get to work, they have to make money. And to tell someone that is the reason for them feeling like they're on a train moving forward when they're standing still or walking on marshmallows, like it just doesn't add up.
Sure.
And so I just kept thinking, like, there's got to be something else that's going on here. And as we started ruling out more things, we would do the MRI, they would find nothing. And so as we started to rule out more things, I kind of reached the end of my rope, like going through all these doctors. And that's when I made this desperate plea on Facebook. And I was like, I will drive anywhere. I will fly anywhere. I'm about to lose my job. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm like a shell of myself, and I want my life back. There's got to be someone out there who can help me. And that's how I was led to this doctor at the Mayo Clinic. Now, I have to say that these doctors did refer me to my current neurologist, who's known as the dizzy doctor, Dr. Bay,
Mhm.
but he had like a 7 or 8 month wait list. And so I was on his wait list, but I couldn't wait 7 or 8 months to get diagnosed. I would have lost my job. So
By the way, for those folks who are that specialized, and we have a number of otoneurologists that we work with in New York City area, and I have some friends across the country. Sometimes their wait lists are a year. to get in
Yeah.
to see them, which is, look, it goes to show you how many people are impacted by balance related issues, equilibrium related disorders.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of folks might be underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed or just frustrated. It's not
Yeah.
just otoneurologist or neurologist. It's the healthcare system in general is look, we're challenged. We're overworked, and it's hard for patients too. We understand that. So I'm sorry, continue.
Well, I would just love for more doctors to go down this field, and I
Yeah,
feel like there will be as there gains we've gained a lot of attention on it in the past few years, and so I
sure.
have hope for it. But you're completely right, and yeah, it's hard for people to wait a year and feel like this because it's straining relationships, it's straining finances, it's straining
Yeah.
jobs, and so that's just kind of why I would encourage people to be willing to spend the money where it matters, because I was spending lots in co-payments, going to all these doctors that had no idea versus when I did eventually lose my job, I had to pay to see my neurologist out of pocket, and it was expensive, but honestly, it was so worth it to have a plan with someone who really understood my illness because it saved me a lot in the long run. And you also, it can also impact your healing and how quickly you heal as well. So I do see that, sometimes access, it can be an issue as well as just people not wanting to travel. And I think teleconference has made it a little bit easier, but sometimes it's just worth it to put all that you have into a physician who, can actually help you and move that needle forward, because otherwise you're just spinning your wheels and not really getting anywhere.
No doubt. You mentioned Dr. Bay, neurologist down in the Dallas area, and once you were finally linked up with him, and you started to explore ways in which to get better and to heal and to try to figure this whole vestibular migraine situation out. Um, I don't want to get too in the weeds about medication because I really think that that's something for people to have conversations with their neurologists about, because everybody's individual, their tolerance is different, their situations are different. Um, but one of the things that you talk about quite often um, are triggers and kind of strategies that you might use throughout the course of your day, or trying to understand things that might actually be a causative factor for setting you off for having an episode, let's say. And you talk a lot about a trigger bucket. I hear you say that quite a bit.
Yeah.
What exactly do you mean by a trigger bucket? And ultimately, maybe you can kind of just bullet point some of the things that you experienced as triggers.
Of course. So I think, I'm not really sure where it started. I know I remember reading it in the Heal Your Headache book by Dr. David Buckles. I also think they talk about it a lot in Johns Hopkins literature as well, but it's basically called the threshold theory. And sometimes people refer to it like a bucket, like feeling a bucket. But basically, you have this threshold, which that's where, if you go over that threshold, that's where you start to experience symptoms or trigger a migraine attack.
Mhm.
And so if you can keep your threshold high by doing all these things that kind of add up and stack on each other, you are less likely to experience an attack when you have your personal triggers added in. So, kind of an example of that would be, weather tends to be a trigger for me. And so I live in the middle of Dallas, and we have a lot of storms and tornadoes sometimes. And so sometimes drastic weather changes can really affect my head, and my ears start to plug, and so when that happens, some of my other triggers can be lack of sleep. If I'm really stressed out, usually I have a special set of food triggers. So caffeine tends to be something that really sets me off as well.
Mhm.
So I have to be careful when we have a weather event, because I know that I need to either get a lot of sleep that night, or I need to watch my hydration and make sure I'm fully hydrated, and I need to eat better and make sure I'm not eating a lot of aged cheese or chocolate, or avoiding caffeine, those things that really set me off. And so, as long as you can keep your threshold high, you can maybe tolerate, maybe if I'm eating very well and I'm getting a lot of sleep, I can tolerate a storm that blows through, versus if I'm not sleeping well, if I'm really stressed out, and that would leave me more vulnerable to an attack. So, managing your migraine can involve a few things. Sometimes that's medications. They can help to raise your threshold
Mhm.
and give you a little more stability. Figuring out if you have food triggers or what they are, that can help raise your threshold. Proper hydration, sleep, like I had mentioned before, stress management, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy. These things all stack on each other to help you raise your threshold and make you less vulnerable to attacks. So
Yep.
as I got better at this, and my brain kind of calmed down more, I was, instead of having 24/7 dizziness and being in a constant state of vestibular migraine attack after attack, I was less vulnerable to it, and I could tolerate a lot more, and I could start going out with my friends and enjoying restaurants again, and I would be less triggered overall.
Yep. Understood.
Yeah.
So basically, what you're describing for most of us is just really dialing in your overall health and well being. It's you're not describing anything that's unusual for
No.
any of us who want to just live a healthier life. Now, one of the things that you talked about was the fact of understanding what foods might be trigger, and that's something that's very common. We hear in the clinic as well, or questions about that. Now, the way that, from what I understand, how you figured out what foods were your triggers was through this concept of an elimination diet, which was brought about by a physician at Johns Hopkins. So there's a lot of kind of weight behind this from a scientific and academic perspective. The concept of elimination diets might be controversial. I don't know enough about it to even comment on it. That's why I'm asking the questions, and I'm not the one who's answering the questions here today. But what led you ultimately to explore, and how did that enter your world, this concept of an elimination diet, and what might be found in our food and what might be triggers for you in particular?
Yeah, so I had tried different healthy eating diets. So I had tried Whole30, I had tried paleo, I had looked into keto, because that can be helpful for migraine sometimes.
Mhm.
I think they've done a few studies on it, but that was too difficult for me. So I was kind of researching like different diets out there for migraine rather than just eating healthy, because doing things like paleo and Whole30 just didn't seem to help me a lot either. And I'm like, I'm eating all these healthy foods. Why am I not? It's not really making a difference. And so when I found this elimination diet that Johns Hopkins endorses, I thought it was interesting because, they are a really credible resource. And I thought, why not just add in one more thing? I think I was really focused on more natural treatments because I was looking to get pregnant in the near future. And so I didn't want, at the time, we didn't have all these amazing medications out, although, even now they don't recommend it for people trying to conceive, just because they don't really know the safety of it in pregnancy. And so I was looking at anything else that I could incorporate. And that's kind of when this diet popped up. And it is controversial. Some people don't agree with it, but I had seen enough people have success with it. And you read the reviews of it on Amazon. I mean, like, a lot of people say it works. And, now I have a successful website for recipes for it. And
Yep.
I think if it didn't work, people wouldn't do it.
Sure.
I wouldn't get emails every day from people, thanking me or saying that it worked for them. So there is something to it, whether it can be backed up by a study or not. And I think studies are really hard to do as far as food triggers, because everyone is so different. We don't all have the same issues at all. And then some people have no food triggers at all, although I'll hear that and then they'll be like, oh, but I can't do caffeine. I'm like, well, that counts.
Yeah.
But I do tend to see people more with vestibular. I see more vestibular doctors actually back an elimination diet like this one.
Mhm.
And I think they also see more success with their patients, which I'm kind of curious about from a science standpoint. I mean, it's purely anecdotal, but I think that there is something there that we tend to see better results with people who have vestibular migraine versus other types of migraine. It would be something interesting to look into. But what I did find with my own experience was I was being triggered by things that I was eating every day, but because I was dizzy every day, I couldn't really notice it.
Mhm.
So my big triggers ended up being different kind of nuts like walnuts, almonds especially, and I was drinking a lot of almond milk. Like I go back and look at my food diary and my migraine symptom diary, and it connects so well with everything that I eventually learned was my trigger. So yogurt was a big one for me. I was eating that every day. I was doing an almond milk coffee every day with regular decaf, and now I know I can't even do regular decaf. I have to do like a special 99% decaffeinated Swiss water process. And so I just never realized that I would be so sensitive to these types of things. And now I realize why these healthy diets didn't exactly work for me when I was eating so many nuts. And those ended up being an issue for me. So I think sometimes, elimination can help you figure out if these things bother you and potentially help you to calm some of your symptoms in the meantime. It's not meant for a long-term solution,
Mhm.
but it can be helpful in the short term.
Yeah, it's just to kind of bring down that overall level of hyperactivity, correct? And then prepares.
Exactly.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah,
So
lower or raise your threshold a little bit. Yeah.
raise your threshold. Yeah, better
Yeah.
said. In terms of your name, the Dizzy Cook, you're known as the Dizzy Cook now, which is kind of cool. You share these vestibular migraine friendly recipes, which are probably just migraine friendly recipes, I would assume.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, online in your book. I'd like to put up actually your website here, just so everybody has the ability to check that out as well. But most people hear diet and they automatically think that it's restrictive and it's boring. But that's not necessarily the case here, because as I was kind of looking through all of your recipes, it just looked like you have ribs. You know,
They're really good.
um, it's that it's not boring and completely flavorless here, correct?
Correct. Like that is the number one complaint I see when people mention, all the foods you can't eat, or they'll bring up the list of foods that you're supposed to avoid initially. And they're like, what can I eat? Water? And I'm like, no, I have over 500 recipes that are not water. I promise you will be very well fed.
Yeah.
But, initially it was hard for myself as well. And I have a lot of culinary training and a passion for food in my background. And what really helped me through my chronic vestibular migraine stage was cooking, because when I lost my job, I could hardly walk outside. And the only thing I could really do was sit and chop vegetables and put a meal together. And it made me feel so worthwhile. Like I found so much of my self-worth in cooking at the time, because I felt like I was losing myself everywhere else.
Yeah.
And so it just became such a deeper passion of mine. Like I always had a passion for food, but it started to mean so much more to me. And I think as that passion grows, you just become so much. I just really went down that path of recipe development and being excited about putting together new things, and really channeled all my energy into cooking. And so I've seen myself grow as a cook and a recipe developer so much in the past 6 years. And it's exciting to put that together. And, beyond just like the really delicious recipes on my website, my goal is to get people excited about cooking and give them an opportunity to find a passion just outside of doctor's appointments, and maybe arguing with spouses and arguing with doctors and insurance and all these things. At the end of the day, like, you can come to your dinner table and eat a bowl of really cozy Boursin pasta and just feel so comforted and like you did something really amazing and be proud of yourself for making that. And so that's what I truly love, like beyond just a migraine diet. Like, it's so much more than that.
Yep.
And I wish people could see that too.
I think it's just interesting because your creativity in your initial occupation, you needed a place for that creativity.
Yeah.
And it's obvious not only through your cooking, but also the way that you present it to the world. It's very creative. You do a great job. Just to
Thank
give you a little
you.
bit of a kudos there. I'd like to
Thanks.
spend maybe just a minute or two on this concept of supplementation. Now, dietary supplements can also be kind of a controversial subject. And I think that it's really important for anyone out there, whether it's supplements for migraine, vestibular migraine, or anything else, should speak to their physician just to make sure that there's no contraindications to taking those supplements. And sometimes you don't even need them. So maybe they should check blood levels through standard blood tests to make sure. But in your case, you talk quite a bit about certain dietary supplements that you have incorporated under the guidance, in most cases, of Dr. Bay.
Mhm.
And I was hoping you might be able to touch upon that just a little bit for us. Again, I don't want this to turn into an advertisement necessarily for certain supplements, but there's certain
Yeah.
things that have a lot of validity, and I think we should talk about it.
Yeah, I think the 3 or 4 that are mostly studied for migraine and that you hear about most often are magnesium, um, B2, so riboflavin, and CoQ10, and vitamin D as well. So that's kind of the 4th one that I would put in there. And, uh, I think supplements are a lot like medication and diet changes and all these things. You have to kind of try and play around with it and see what works for you, obviously under the guidance of your doctor. But
Yep.
Dr. Bay really sent me home with a maximum amount and was like, oh, that sounds good. Like, yeah, sure, you're interested in magnesium glycinate. Sure, take that one. So a lot of doctors don't give you like precise recommendations on like brands or
Mhm.
exactly what kinds of magnesium you should be taking. And so that's kind of how I went down the research hole on magnesium and really figured out different types and how they can kind of work together. So I actually take a combination of 3 different types of magnesium. One is really great for anxiety and sleep. So that's magnesium glycinate. Cognimag, or like magnesium 3 and 8, which I've kind of talked about before, it it can be helpful for memory. And so that one seems to really help a lot with my brain fog. And I can take it in the morning as like kind of a coffee supplement, and it wakes me up a little bit. It's expensive, so I only take a small amount of it, is just like to supplement my full amount. And then I also added in magnesium citrate postpartum just to have an extra boost. My OB really liked that one. And so I take a combination of them, and no doctor would ever be like, oh yes, do 50 milligrams of this and do 200 of this. But again, this is just something I had to explore and figure out, oh, this makes me feel really good. And I've since actually stopped taking B2 because I found that it wasn't really benefiting me now that I'm feeling a lot better. So, it's just like different medications. It's just like trying different diets. Sometimes you just have to see what works well for you, but these are the most often recommended because of general studies for migraine.
Perfect. I appreciate you sharing that. There's
Yeah.
there's also a whole other area that I was hoping to get to, but we might have to save it for another time because there's
Okay.
actual technologies that are used, specifically things like vagal nerve stimulation or trigeminal nerve stimulation, that have a lot of science behind them, and there are certain technologies. I think I'll put that aside for now because I have a few other questions that I'd really like to ask you. But just the reason why I bring this up is that what I'm getting, and I think that kind of the take home for anyone who might be watching this, who's not necessarily, well, maybe even healthcare providers too, that vestibular migraine is and probably vestibular disorders in general, really requires this multidisciplinary collaborative type of an approach. Not only regarding the diagnosis, but also the treatment. It might require some pharmaceutical intervention, as we talked a little bit about, diet intervention, focusing on things like food and other things as triggers, stress and lack of sleep and caffeine and all these different things. And also food can serve as a benefit, as you were saying, food as medicine,
Yeah.
that kind of like that concept. So what I would really like to encourage everyone watching and listening to this, to look at this as kind of a multi-tiered situation versus dealing with it in silos. We're trained in kind of in our healthcare system to kind of look at things in silos, and things like this probably more than anything require us to look at this as a very collaborative type of a situation, not only within the healthcare system, but listening to our patients as well.
Yeah, and I want to say that these things take time. I know that I've just started working out with a small pod of women in the morning, and our trainer is like, "Oh, you have to add in 10,000 steps a day." And we're just trying to get used to working out 3 times a week together, and it just all seems overwhelming. It's the same thing with your migraine treatment. I mean, we hear, "Oh, you have to exercise and you have to change your diet and you have to incorporate supplements and you have to do this." And yes, it can all work together to help, but that's super overwhelming to start all at the same time. So if you can take it in digestible portions and work on, a set of things at a time, and also really give it time to work. I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, I started taking magnesium the other day and I don't feel any different." Well, these things take, 3 to 4 months to even notice some type of a change. I mean, it took me 2 years of doing all the things to even get to those dizzy-free days. And so it's not an overnight fix as well. Like, these things take time.
Yeah. I think that's just life in general, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we want it all right away, which would be great. But
So are there days where, well, actually, let me rephrase this question. How are you feeling now?
Oh, I feel really good right now, actually. Yeah, it's been a good week. It's been kind of a stressful week for me. So I notice when my stress goes up, I do have a little more dizziness, but I'm also really trying to manage well with, I have all my 5 different cups of liquids over here, different types of liquids, and,
Sure.
Staying on top of my supplements and using my vagus nerve stimulation device. And yeah, just being really faithful about all the treatments that work for me. I feel great.
So what have you learned about yourself throughout this whole experience?
I am super resilient. I also learned that I'm really good at adapting and dealing with different difficulties that come my way. Shortly after going through vestibular migraine, I went through infertility as well, and recurrent pregnancy loss, and that was its own battle. But I felt like I was so much more, I could really conquer it more head on, and that I was a better advocate for myself, especially with doctors. So I got results a lot faster because I was pushing and asking the right questions. So I learned a lot of that from my time, learning how to deal with a vestibular disorder. And I think that it just really changes you to your core as a person. You learn how strong you are. You learn who your true friends are. You learn how to deal and communicate with your spouse, or things fall apart sometimes for people, and they either make them stronger, or that you start to realize that it just doesn't work out. And so yeah, it's been a good journey. I'm not ever happy I had it, but with the way that it's impacted my life and made it better, I do feel like that I'm not upset that I got sick. I don't really know how to phrase that.
No, it makes a lot of sense. If you really look at,
Yeah.
at anyone who's been through very challenging situations, whether it's health related issues or traumatic events in their life, it changes them. And hopefully it changes us
Yeah.
for the better. And it allows us to not only be better individually, but it helps us impact others as well. And that's exactly what you're doing through your work. So I just want to commend you for that, because
Thank
you're
you.
sharing your story, and being so vulnerable with your story is really helping a lot of people, not only on the patient side, but look, your work actually encouraged me to reach out to you to learn more from your perspective. So whatever you're doing is working. So it's a wonderful thing that you're putting out into the world. Um, I guess just have maybe one or two more questions. We're sort of coming
Okay.
up on the end of the hour here, and I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. What would you say is kind of your most important piece of advice that you would give someone out there who is still kind of undiagnosed? Maybe it's vestibular migraine, maybe it's not. What would be your advice to people out there who are trying to kind of figure their situation out, and they're just experiencing similar symptoms to what you had in the past?
Yeah, so I would definitely start. I have a blog post on my website called the Vestibular Migraine Guide,
Mhm.
and it has a list of doctors that different readers have been to, as well as my own neurologist, but just doctors that have been highlighted, or that different readers have said that they just really love them, and that they've helped them a lot. And so I've kind of narrowed those down on there, and it just kind of helps you go through what to look for, what to start, how to get a diagnosis, what questions to ask. And I think really diving into some of the resources available. So, Dr. Bay has a book called Victory Over Vestibular Migraine. Even watching, watching informational videos like this will prepare you so much for your appointments, because then you can go in there as a knowledgeable patient and you can ask the important questions. And so if people are watching this and they think they have vestibular migraine, like, major kudos to them, because I wouldn't have even known where to start back in the day. And so you're already miles ahead, just being an advocate by watching informational videos like this. And I think that's amazing. So if you can just match yourself with the right proper physician to help, I mean, you're pretty much set.
Awesome. Great advice.
Yeah.
So some rapid fire questions. Hopefully they're not too triggering for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite sound?
Oh my gosh, probably the ocean or rain. I really like rain too.
It is relaxing. Yes.
Yeah, also my son's laugh. That's
See,
the best
that's
too.
kind of what I was hoping you were going to say, but I didn't
Yeah,
want to jump in.
I guess I
Yeah.
should. He's been crying a lot more lately. I think it's the teething, but no, we're starting to get some smiles back again.
Good, good. You'll get through that also. It'll make you stronger. What do you think is your superpower is?
Oh my gosh, my superpower. I hope that it's making people feel better. That's that's what I hope it is. I would love every single time I'm having a bad day, someone sends me an email, and I swear it's just like they knew that I needed it, and they'll just send me an email saying like something about how something I wrote impacted them, or how a video made them ask their doctor for a new treatment. That's what was the key for them to get it better. And so that kind of stuff means a whole lot to me. And so I hope that's my superpower.
That's great. What food can you not live without?
Oh my gosh. So many foods. What's my favorite? I would say, um, oh, that's such a hard question. I really like cheese.
But you're not supposed to have cheese, right?
Well, there actually are a few unaged cheeses that I really like. So I like
Okay,
to cook a lot with goat cheese and then
gotcha.
boursin cheese. I have so many boursin recipes on my website, and I don't know why they don't sponsor me yet. But I love boursin cheese, and it's really great. And I think, oh, well, I'm not sure about boursin, but I know that goat cheese and a lot of the unaged cheeses are also low in sodium. So really
Mhm.
good for people with Meniere's disease as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Last question. If you could share one of your migraine-friendly recipes and meals with one inspiring person, who would that person be and why?
Oh my gosh.
I saved the zinger for the last question. I'm sorry.
That is really difficult. So I have been can they be alive or from the
Sure.
past?
Either one.
Either one. Okay, so I have been really into the HBO series about Julia Child
Ah,
lately, and I connect. It's about I think everyone's seen Julie and Julia with Meryl, but this new season is about her making her cooking show, and about I'm so sorry, my dog is going crazy, but this new season is about her journey kind of making her own TV show and how she didn't have anyone to take her seriously. And
the
so
dog does not like your
I'm
answer.
so sorry. I don't even know what she's barking about. We're in a closed room. So I really connected a lot with it just from a standpoint of trying to be someone who's cooking with migraine and
Sure.
also creating this website for people. Because do get a lot of criticism, either not having a medical background
Mhm.
or people, don't necessarily agree with you. And so a lot of things people say can kind of cut you down. And so it was
Yep.
nice to see, she went through that as well with people, kind of doubting her knowledge of French cooking and how she approached life with such a passion for food and for teaching people how to cook, and I just really connected with it. So I don't even know if she would like my migraine friendly cooking, but I would love to share a meal with her.
It's a great answer.
And especially a French inspired one.
Great answer. What's
Yeah,
interesting, just to close on that, I know that you are working on a book with Dr. Bay
yeah,
on some new recipes, correct?
yes,
And and we were speaking a little bit about this before we went live, but the fact that you have yourself as the person who is impacted directly from migraine, and then you have Dr. Bay, who comes
yeah,
at it from the medical perspective and trained and works with patients. I think it's great because it does add, as you mentioned, some people might question credibility or
yeah.
motive or whatever it might be. This adds some credibility to the picture. So that should be out towards the tail end of this year, I think.
Yeah, and what's actually really interesting about it compared to my first book is it's not really elimination based. It's
Uh,
more based on like a long term way of eating for brain health. So a lot of that goes back to the Mediterranean diet,
sure.
which I believe has quite a few studies on it. And then we also incorporate some of the new research that's come out about omega 3s and balancing omega 3s and omega 6s, and how that showed an impact on migraine as well.
Mhm.
So it's definitely an interesting book. The recipes are a little more advanced than my first book, a little more intricate, and new flavors. So I use things like za'atar and sumac that people might not be exactly comfortable with,
Mhm.
but I think it also opens a door for having new experiences and trying new flavors and hopefully opening yourself up to something you're not quite used to, and making food and cooking a little bit more fun. So I'm really excited about this book as like a next step perspective, and maybe for people who can't necessarily do the full elimination or think it's going to be too complicated, like this would definitely be a fit for them. Also includes, well, we include things like citrus, and yogurt as well. We give edits for people who have the sensitivity.
Mhm.
So that's what's kind of nice about the whole new book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look out for that. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story, helping to educate me, educate anyone who's watching this live, and also who might be watching the recorded version of this. I've been kind of flashing up your social
Uh,
details throughout the conversation, but pretty much everything is at the Dizzy Cook, correct?
yeah.
Okay.
Easy.
Should be easy enough to recognize
Yeah.
that. So I encourage all of you who are watching this just to kind of reach out if you have questions. And if you're in New York and you have questions, we're based there. We're happy to help you anytime. Alicia, thank you so much again. I really do appreciate your time. This was a great and very educational and informational conversation. And I look forward to kind of talking to you more because I learned a lot today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so sorry about Coco, but you guys can send her a letter.
all of a sudden your dog got canceled on social media.
Yeah, I know, right?
Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for watching us. And if you guys have questions, you will know where to find us at NewYorkDizzyDoctors.com or NewYorkHearingDoctors.com. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.